boy shouts that the millionaire's daughter is in danger, but he ignores it until he sees the crowd. Richard Thompson was at the peak of happiness as guests filled the main hall of the club to celebrate the engagement of his only daughter. Champagne flowed freely, musicians played soft melodies, and everything seemed too perfect to be true. That's when he heard shouts coming from the main entrance. A boy in simple, worn-out clothes was trying to get past the security guards, gesturing desperately. "She's in danger! Your daughter is in danger!" the boy yelled, his voice echoing through the marble corridor. Richard made an irritated gesture with his hand, indicating to the guards to remove that nuisance. The last thing he needed was some beggar or crazy person disrupting the most important party of the year. His construction business had prospered beyond any expectation, and this engagement also represented an important business alliance with the groom's family. "Get that kid out of here," he ordered, turning his attention back to the guests who were starting to look toward the commotion. But the boy didn't give up. Even as he was held by two burly security guards, he kept shouting with an urgency that made some people stop to watch. "You don't understand. She will regret it. This man is not who he says he is." Richard felt his blood boil. Who did that boy think he was to make accusations against his daughter's fiancé? Michael Reynolds came from a traditional New York City family, had a business degree from a renowned university, and was everything a father could wish for his only daughter. "Call the club security and expel this boy now." Richard raised his voice but kept his smile for the watching guests. The boy, realizing he would be removed at any moment, shouted even louder. "I know things. I heard conversations. This man is lying to everyone." It was then that Richard noticed something that made him hesitate. Some people already had their cell phones raised, filming the scene. In today's times, any scandal could become news in minutes. He couldn't afford to look like an insensitive man, throwing out a child who claimed to have important information. With a controlled sigh, Richard approached the guards. "Wait. Let the boy speak. Let's settle this once and for all." The guards loosened their grip, but kept the boy secure. Richard looked at that sweaty face, at those wide eyes filled with determination mixed with fear. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain what you're doing here," said Richard, crossing his arms. "And it better be important, because you are disrupting a private event." The boy swallowed hard but did not look away. "My name is Tyler. I work at Mrs. Martha's fruit stand near the main avenue. Yesterday I was delivering fruit to the office building on Palm Street when I saw him." "Saw who?" Richard asked impatiently. "Your daughter's fiancé, sir, Michael." "So what? His office is in that building." "But he wasn't going to his office," Tyler continued, his voice gaining firmness. "He went into a different room, and I heard him talking on his cell phone. He was telling someone that after the wedding he would get your daughter to sign some papers, that it was a matter of weeks to get access to the entire fortune." Richard felt a pang of anger, but also of doubt. "That's ridiculous. A lying boy trying to make money with false accusations. How much do you want to leave and stop this farce?" "I don't want money," Tyler protested, and tears were beginning to form in his eyes. "I just can't stay quiet, knowing someone is going to be deceived. My mother always taught me to do what's right, even when it's hard." More people were approaching now, drawn by the commotion. Richard saw his older sister, Margaret, appear among the onlookers. She was 68 years old and knew her brother better than anyone. One look from her was enough for Richard to know that she thought he should at least investigate. "Where is your mother now?" Richard asked, trying to keep his tone controlled. Tyler lowered his eyes. "She's working. She cleans 3 different houses. She doesn't even know I came here. She would have stopped me. She would have told me not to stick my nose where it doesn't belong. But I couldn't stay quiet, sir. I couldn't." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Before Richard could answer, a female voice cut through the air. "Dad, what's going on?" Emily Thompson had come down the stairs from the club's 2nd floor, where she was getting ready with her bridesmaids. She wore a light blue dress that accentuated her green eyes. Her brown hair was tied up in an elegant bun. The 26-year-old young woman had the face of her late mother, something that always made Richard's heart tighten. "Nothing you need to worry about, daughter," Richard tried to reassure her. "Just a misunderstanding." But Emily had already seen the boy being held by the security guards. She approached with determined steps, and Richard recognized that expression. It was the same stubbornness his wife had when she decided to uncover the truth about something. "Who are you?" Emily asked Davy directly. The boy looked at her, and Richard saw something change in his face. There was recognition, but also something more. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. "My name is Tyler, miss. I came here because I couldn't let you make a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "Your fiancé is not who you think he is." Michael Reynolds appeared at that moment, making his way through the guests with his confident posture. He was tall, had neatly combed dark hair, and wore an impeccable navy blue suit. His smile was perfect, practiced, but Richard noticed that he pressed his lips together for a split second upon seeing Tyler. "What's going on here?" Michael asked, placing a protective hand on Emily's back. "This boy is making absurd accusations," Richard explained. "Says he heard you talking about papers and a fortune." Michael laughed, but the sound came out a bit too forced. "Accusations? From a child?" "Richard, you can't be taking this seriously." "I heard you," Tyler insisted, trying to break free from the security guards. "You said it was a matter of weeks, that after the wedding it would be easy." "The boy probably overheard some business talk out of context," Michael said, keeping his tone calm, but Richard noticed he avoided looking directly at Tyler. "I deal with contracts and agreements every day. Any conversation can sound suspicious to someone who doesn't understand the subject." Emily looked from one to the other, confusion written on her face. "But why would a child come here and make up a story like this?" she asked. "Money, obviously," Michael replied too quickly. "These people think they can extort the rich with threats and accusations." "I don't want money," Tyler shouted, and this time there was pure frustration in his voice. "Why doesn't anyone believe me?" Margaret, Richard's sister, stepped forward. She was an elegant woman with well-kept grey hair and had a penetrating gaze that few could meet. "Richard, when was the last time you actually investigated Michael's past?" "Margaret, this is not the time," Richard began, but she interrupted him. "It is exactly the time. This boy risked being thrown out, humiliated, possibly arrested, just to give a warning. That is not the behavior of someone who wants money. It is the behavior of someone who is desperate to do the right thing." "Aunt Margaret is right," Emily said quietly. "At the very least, we could hear what he has to say." Michael let out a nervous laugh. "Honey, you can't possibly be considering believing a street kid over me, over us, over everything we've built together." "He doesn't seem like a street kid to me," Emily replied, and there was a growing firmness in her voice. "He seems scared and sincere." Richard watched the scene unfold, torn between protecting his daughter from a possible con artist and protecting her from the public humiliation of calling off an engagement based on the word of an unknown child. More guests were approaching now, forming a semicircle around them. Some whispered among themselves, others kept filming. "All right," Richard decided. "Let's handle this in a civilized manner. Michael, would you mind showing us your cell phone, yesterday's calls?" Michael's expression changed instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of indignation. "This is a violation of my privacy. You're questioning my integrity because of a boy you don't even know." "It's not a question of integrity," Richard answered, carefully observing every micro-expression on the groom's face. "It's a question of reassuring my daughter. If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." Michael hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any words could. "I will not submit to this humiliation," he declared, his voice rising in pitch. "If you don't trust me, Richard, perhaps we should reconsider this whole family alliance." "Family alliance," Tyler repeated the phrase, as if something had clicked in his mind. "That's all that matters to you, isn't it? It's not love. It never was love." Emily took a step back, moving away from Michael. Her face was pale. "Michael, please, just show the phone. Prove he's wrong and we can continue with the party." "I don't need to prove anything to anyone," Michael replied, but his hand instinctively went to the pocket holding his phone, as if protecting a secret. It was then that an older woman's voice cut through the tension. "Tyler, Tyler, is that you?" A woman of about 70, dressed in the club's waitress uniform, was making her way through the people. Her face showed a mix of astonishment and concern. "Mrs. Rose?" Richard recognized the woman. She had worked at the club for decades. She was practically an institution there. "Mr. Richard," Mrs. Rose said, breathless from having rushed over. "This boy. I know this boy. I know his family." "Mrs. Rose, please, you don't need to get involved," Tyler pleaded, but the woman was already by Richard's side. "I worked for your family for 15 years, Mr. Richard. 15 years before I retired and came to work here part-time. I knew your late wife, I watched your daughter grow up, and I can say with absolute certainty that this boy comes from honest people." "How do you know him?" Margaret asked. Mrs. Rose looked at Tyler with a tenderness that seemed to carry years of history. "His mother, Deborah, was my neighbor, a hard-working woman who raised this boy alone with great sacrifice. She never taught her son to lie or cheat anyone. If Tyler is here saying these things, it's because he truly believes he is protecting someone." The revelation hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Richard looked at Michael and saw the man beginning to sweat, his eyes darting quickly as if calculating an escape. "This proves nothing," Michael tried to argue. "The boy could be honest and still be mistaken." "Then show the phone," Emily repeated, and this time there was a coldness in her voice that Richard rarely heard. "If you have nothing to hide, show it." Michael took a deep breath, and for a moment it seemed he would give in. But then he did something that surprised everyone. He pulled the cell phone from his pocket and hurled it to the floor with force, shattering the screen into dozens of pieces. "There. Now no one will see anything. And you know why? Because this is ridiculous. All of this is completely ridiculous." The ballroom fell silent. Even the music had stopped. All eyes were fixed on Michael, who realized too late how much that gesture had incriminated him. "You just destroyed the only thing that could have proven your innocence," Margaret observed coldly. "I destroyed it because I will not be treated like a criminal," Michael shouted, completely losing his composure. "All of you, looking at me as if I was some kind of con artist, based on the word of some random kid." "Be careful what you say about the boy," Richard warned, his voice low and dangerous. Emily had tears streaming down her face now, smudging her carefully applied makeup. "If you had nothing to hide, you would have shown the phone," she said, her voice breaking. "But you chose to destroy it. Why, Michael, what were you hiding?" Michael ran his hand through his hair, ruining the perfect hairstyle. He looked around, seeing all the faces staring at him with a mixture of curiosity and condemnation. When his eyes landed on Tyler, there was pure hatred there. "You," he pointed at the boy, "you ruined everything, everything." "I saved her from you," Tyler replied with a courage that seemed too big for his small body. "Security, escort Mr. Reynolds out," Richard ordered, his decision made. "The party is over." "You can't do this to me," Michael protested as the security guards approached. "We had a deal, a business alliance. You will lose millions." "I'd rather lose millions than lose my daughter to a liar," Richard replied, and there was absolute conviction in his words. Michael tried to approach Emily one last time, but she recoiled, shrinking back beside her Aunt Margaret. "Emily, please, listen to me. I love you. All of this is a misunderstanding that can be explained." "Just go away, Michael," Emily said between sobs. "Just go away." The security guards escorted Michael out under the gaze of hundreds of guests. Some seemed pleased with the drama, others embarrassed. Richard turned to the DJ and made a signal. The music started again in a vain attempt to normalize the situation, but nothing was normal. Emily had sat down in a nearby chair, crying openly. Margaret was by her side, stroking her hair, and Tyler remained there, still held by the security guards, looking exhausted and frightened by what he had caused. Richard approached the boy and gestured for the guards to release him. "You," he said, looking into Tyler's eyes. "You owe me a full explanation. How did you know where the party was? How did you know exactly what you had overheard? And why did you risk so much to warn people you don't even know?" Tyler wiped the tears that had begun to fall. "I can explain everything, sir, but there are more things you need to know. Things about Michael. Things I found out after I overheard that conversation." "What kind of things?" Richard asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Bad things, sir. Very bad things." Mrs. Rose put a hand on Tyler's shoulder, a gesture of silent support. "Let the boy speak, Mr. Richard. Let him tell everything." And so, in the middle of a ballroom where an engagement should have been celebrated, Tyler began to tell a story that went far beyond what anyone could have imagined. A story that would connect the past and the present in unexpected ways, and that would change the lives of everyone present forever. Richard listened in silence as Tyler explained how, in the days following the conversation he had overheard, he began to follow Michael. Not out of malice, but out of a sense of responsibility he couldn't ignore. "After I heard that conversation in the building, I kept thinking," Tyler began, his voice still shaky, but gaining strength as he spoke. "My mother always says that when you see something wrong, you have to do something. So I started paying attention." "Did you follow him?" Margaret asked, her voice without judgment, just curiosity. "Not at first. First, I tried to find out more about him at the fruit stand. Mrs. Martha knows everyone in the neighborhood, so I asked if she knew of any Michael Reynolds. She didn't, but she pointed me to Mrs. Mary, who works at the stationery store on the avenue." Richard Thompson exchanged a look with Margaret. That boy had more initiative than many adults. "And did this Mrs. Mary know anything?" Richard encouraged. "She said there was a Michael Reynolds who bought a lot of office supplies, but that it had been a few months since he'd been around. She said he had bought expensive things on credit and never paid. She even tried calling the number he left, but the phone didn't exist anymore." Emily Thompson raised her head, her eyes swollen from crying so much. "He told me he had a well-established office," she murmured. "That business was going very well." "I know, miss," Tyler said kindly. "That's why I kept investigating. Last Tuesday, I saw him leaving that building on Palm Street, but instead of leaving, he stayed on the corner, waiting. Then a man in a grey suit appeared." "Did you see who he was meeting?" Richard asked. "I did. They went to a nearby diner. I stayed outside, pretending to sell candy, but I was trying to listen. The man in the grey suit was angry. He said Michael owed a lot of money, that he had already given him too much time to pay." Richard felt his stomach turn. Debts. Michael was in debt and saw the marriage to Emily as a way to solve his financial problems. "How much does he owe?" Richard asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The man said $500,000, sir. A murmur went through the guests who were still nearby, listening to every word. $500,000 was a fortune for most people there, but for Richard, it was the kind of amount he moved regularly in his business. For Michael, however, it clearly represented a bottomless pit. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Continue," Richard asked, sensing there was more. "Michael told the man not to worry, that in a few weeks he would have all the money and more. He said he was engaged to a rich young lady and that her father was naive, that it would be easy to convince his wife to sign power of attorney documents after the marriage." The words cut Richard like knives. Naive. Michael had called him naive. "The man in the grey suit didn't seem very convinced," Tyler continued. "He said Michael had promised money before and never delivered, that this time he needed guarantees." "What kind of guarantees?" Margaret asked. Michael showed him a paper. I couldn't see what it was, but the man read it and seemed satisfied. He said, "If you can really get this, it will solve all your problems." Then they left together. Richard ran his hand over his face, trying to process it all. He had been so blind, so focused on making a good alliance for Emily and for the business, that he hadn't properly investigated the man his daughter was going to marry. "There's one more thing, sir," Tyler said hesitantly. "I didn't want to say it in front of everyone, but—" "Speak," Richard insisted. "At this point, it doesn't matter who's listening. Yesterday morning, I saw Michael going into another house, a simple house in the Brookline neighborhood. He had a key. He walked in as if he lived there. He lives in an apartment in the central region," Emily said, her voice coming out as a whisper. "He showed me when we started dating." "I know, miss, but this house was different, so I kept watching. After about 2 hours, a woman with a small child came out. They got into the car and left, but before leaving, the child called to someone inside, called Dad. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the most distant guests stopped talking, absorbed by the devastating revelation. "He has another family," Margaret said what everyone was thinking. Emily let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands. Richard felt an anger growing inside him, a cold and calculated anger. Michael hadn't just tried to deceive him financially. He had played with his daughter's feelings. He had planned to destroy her life. "Where is this house?" Richard asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Mr. Richard, perhaps it's not a good idea to go there now." Mrs. Rose tried to intervene. "Emotions are running very high. I need to know the complete truth," Richard insisted. "Tyler, can you take me there?" The boy nodded, but he seemed frightened by the intensity in Richard's gaze. "I'm going with you," Margaret declared, "and Emily stays here resting." "No," Emily stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm going too. I need to see this with my own eyes. I need to know the extent of his lies." Richard wanted to protest. He wanted to spare his daughter more pain, but he recognized that determination. It was the same his wife had, the same he himself had when he made a decision. Arguing would be useless. "All right," he agreed. "But first, I want to know one thing, Tyler. Why did you care so much? Why did you risk so much for people you don't know?" Tyler lowered his eyes, and for the first time since he started speaking, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Because my mother used to tell me stories," he said quietly. "Stories about when she worked in rich people's houses, about how sometimes she saw wrong things and couldn't do anything because she needed the job. She always regretted not helping when she could. I didn't want to have that regret." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. That boy with his worn-out clothes and his hands calloused from so much work had more character than many men in suits he knew. "You did the right thing," Richard said, putting his hand on Tyler's shoulder, "and I will make sure you don't regret that courage." Half an hour later, Richard, Margaret, Emily and Tyler were in front of a single-story house in Brookline. It was a simple but well-kept construction, with a small garden in the front. Richard's car was parked discreetly across the street. "It's here," Tyler confirmed. "This is where I saw the woman and the child leave." Richard observed the house for a moment, trying to control his emotions. Then he got out of the car, followed by the others. "What are you going to do?" Emily asked, her voice still weak from the tears. "I'm going to knock on the door and ask to speak with whoever lives here," Richard replied. "I'm going to do this civilly." He walked to the door and rang the bell. They waited. Nothing. He rang again. This time they heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing a woman approximately 30 years old, with a baby in her arms. She had tired but kind eyes, brown hair tied in a messy ponytail. "Good afternoon," she said, puzzled by the presence of that group at her door. "Can I help you?" Richard hesitated, not knowing exactly how to begin. "Sorry to bother you. My name is Richard Thompson, and this is my daughter Emily. We are looking for information about Michael Reynolds." The change in the woman's face was instantaneous. She paled, holding the baby tighter. "Do you know Michael?" she asked, her voice trembling. He was my daughter's fiancé," Richard explained, watching every reaction. The woman closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, there were tears there. "Come in," she said, stepping away from the door. "I think we all need to talk." The living room was small but cozy. There were toys scattered on the floor, photos on the walls. Richard looked at one of them and felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. It was Michael, smiling next to that woman, holding a newborn baby. "My name is Melissa," the woman said, sitting on the sofa with the baby still in her arms. "And this is Nathan, my son with Michael." Emily let out a choked sound, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Margaret held her by the shoulders, offering silent support. "How long have you been together?" Richard asked, his voice controlled despite the storm of emotions. 5 years, Melissa answered, wiping her tears with her free hand. We got married 3 years ago. Civilly, of course. Michael always said he didn't want a big ceremony. 3 years, Emily repeated in disbelief. We've been together for 2 years. He was married when he started dating me. Melissa sobbed, rocking the baby instinctively. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this. How did he manage to hide it? Margaret asked. How does a man keep 2 lives separate for so long? He traveled a lot, Melissa explained. Or at least that's what he said. Sometimes he'd be gone for weeks, saying he had business in other cities. I trusted him completely. Richard looked around, processing the information. Then something caught his attention. There were bills stacked on the corner table, some with red overdue stamps. May I ask about your financial situation? Richard questioned, already imagining the answer. Melissa followed his gaze to the bills. It's difficult, she admitted. Michael always had trouble with money. When we met, he had a good job, but he lost it soon after. Since then, it's been one job after another, always promising the next one would be the real deal. For the last few months, he's barely been able to cover the basic household expenses. Did he ask you for money? Emily asked. Not exactly, but he asked me to sign some papers. He said it was to get a loan that would save our business. I signed everything he asked me to. Richard felt his blood run cold. It was exactly what Michael had planned to do with Emily. Manipulate, deceive, make her sign documents that would probably leave her in debt or transfer her assets. Do you still have those documents? Richard asked. Melissa nodded and went to a cabinet, returning with a yellowed folder. She handed it to Richard, who began to leaf through it. They were contracts, powers of attorney, debt transfer documents, all legally worded to look innocent, but structured so that Melissa had basically assumed all of Michael's debts without realizing it. This is, Richard began, but the words failed him. This is fraud, Margaret completed. He defrauded his own wife. Melissa rocked back and forth, soothing the baby who was starting to whimper. I knew something was wrong, she said between sobs. In the last few months he was different, more anxious but also more hopeful. He said everything would get better soon, that he had a plan. I thought he had finally landed a good deal. The good deal was marrying my daughter, Richard said, bitterness tinging every word. Everyone fell silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. It was Tyler who broke the silence. Do you have family? Someone who can help? He asked with genuine concern. Melissa shook her head. My parents died when I was 20. I have no siblings. Michael was all I had. Emily stood up and, to everyone's surprise, went to Melissa and knelt in front of her. We were both deceived, she said softly. You are not to blame for any of this. But I should have noticed, Melissa cried. I should have seen the signs. He was good at lying, Emily replied, her own tears falling. Very good. Richard watched the 2 women, victims of the same man, comforting each other, and felt a mixture of pride for his daughter's compassion and absolute anger toward Michael. We are going to fix this, he declared. I will call my lawyers to review these documents. If there is any way to void these fraudulent debts, we will find it. Melissa looked at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Why? Why would you help me? I am the wife of the man who tried to deceive your daughter. Because you are also a victim, Richard replied simply, and because it is the right thing to do. Tyler smiled slightly upon hearing that. It was exactly what his mother always said, doing the right thing. But where is Michael now? Margaret asked. He knows he's been found out. What will he do? As if in answer to the question, Melissa's cell phone rang. She looked at the screen and grew even paler. It's him, she whispered. Answer it, Richard instructed, and put it on speakerphone. With trembling hands, Melissa answered. Michael? Her voice came out hesitantly. Melissa, thank God. Michael's voice sounded desperate on the other end of the line. Listen, I need you to help me. Something terrible has happened. What thing? Melissa asked, looking at Richard, who gestured for her to continue. That deal I was closing, the marriage that was going to solve all our problems, it went wrong. A meddling kid showed up at the party and ruined everything. Tyler clenched his fists upon hearing how Michael referred to him, but remained silent. "And now?" Melissa asked. "Now I need to leave the city for a while. Let things cool down. But I need money. Can you withdraw whatever is in the account?" "Michael, there's nothing in the account. You know that. Then borrow from someone." "I don't know, Melissa. You need to help me." Michael's voice was becoming increasingly agitated, bordering on panic. "Why should I help you?" Melissa asked, and there was a new strength in her voice. "You used me, Michael. You made me sign documents that left me full of debt." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "How do you know that?" Michael asked, his voice changing from desperate to suspicious. "Because there are people here with me now. Richard Thompson, his daughter, your fiancée." The silence that followed was deafening. "Melissa," Michael finally spoke, his voice now cold and calculating. "You don't understand what you are doing. These people don't care about you. They only want to destroy me." "No, Michael," Melissa replied, looking at Emily, who was holding her hand. "The one who destroyed me was you. And now I am going to do the right thing. If you hand me over to them, you will regret it. I guarantee it." "Are you threatening me?" Melissa asked, incredulous. "I am warning you, you have no idea who I am involved with, the people I owe money to. If I go down, you go down with me." Richard made a signal, and Melissa, understanding, ended the call. Everyone stood still, absorbing the gravity of the threat. "He is desperate," Margaret observed, "and desperate men are dangerous." "We need to go somewhere safe," Richard decided. "Melissa, get the baby and some essential things. You are coming with us." "Where to?" "To my house. You will be safe there while we sort out this situation." Melissa hesitated only for a moment before nodding. She went to the bedroom to prepare a bag, while the others waited in the living room. "Mr. Richard," Tyler said quietly, "I think I know who Michael is involved with." "What do you mean?" "Remember the man in the grey suit I saw with him? I've seen that man before, somewhere else. He is Vincent Miller, the owner of several shell companies here in the region. My mother used to clean his office. She says he's not someone to be trifled with." Richard knew the name. Vincent Miller had a reputation for being a luxury loan shark, someone who lent money at outrageous interest rates to desperate people. There were also rumors of shady business dealings, but nothing was ever proven. "If Michael owes money to Vincent, the situation is more serious than I thought," Richard murmured. "Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." Melissa came back with a bag and the baby, who had finally fallen asleep in her arms. Everyone left the house and got into Richard's car. During the drive to the Thompson mansion, no one said much. Each was lost in their own thoughts, processing the day's events. When they arrived at Richard's property, Melissa couldn't hide her astonishment. The automatic gate opened onto a long driveway, lined with ancient trees, leading to an imposing two-story house, all made of light stone with large windows. "Welcome," Richard said simply, helping her out of the car. Inside the house, Richard asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Betty, to prepare one of the guest rooms for Melissa and the baby. He also asked her to serve something for everyone to eat, since no one had had dinner yet. Seated at the large dining table, they ate in silence for a few minutes. It was Emily who broke the silence. "Dad, what are we going to do about Michael?" Richard finished chewing before answering. "Tomorrow morning I'll call my lawyers. We'll review all the documents Melissa signed, see what can be done. I'm also going to hire a private investigator to find out exactly who Michael is involved with and the extent of his debts." "And if he shows up here?" Margaret asked. "The property security is reinforced. He won't be able to get in. And if he tries, well, we'll have enough evidence to take legal action." Tyler, who was eating quietly in a corner, looked at Richard. "Sir, I think I should leave now. My mother must be worried. She doesn't even know where I am." Richard looked at his watch. It was past 9 in the evening. "You're right. Where do you live? I'll have my driver take you." "That's not necessary, sir. I can take the bus." "Absolutely not. After everything you did today, it's the least I can do. Besides, I want to speak with your mother. to thank her in person for raising such a courageous son. Tyler blushed at the compliment but nodded. 20 minutes later, Richard was sitting in the small living room of Deborah's house, Tyler's mother. The woman, approximately 40 years old, had the same delicate features as her son and the same determined eyes. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know what to say," Deborah said, still processing everything Richard had told her. "When Tyler got here earlier, he said he had stopped a scam, but I didn't imagine it was something so big." "Your son saved my daughter from a decision that could have ruined her life," Richard said sincerely. "He acted with more courage and character than many adults I know." Deborah looked at Tyler with a mixture of pride and worry. "I always told him never to ignore it when he sees something wrong, but I also told him to be careful, not to put himself in danger." "He did put himself in danger," Richard agreed, "but he did it to protect other people. And for that, I would like to offer something." "You don't need to offer anything," Deborah began, but Richard raised his hand. "Please let me finish. Tyler told me he works at Mrs. Martha's fruit stand and that you work cleaning several houses. Is that true?" Deborah nodded, a little embarrassed. "Yes, I work at 3 different houses during the week and sometimes do extra cleaning on weekends. And Tyler, does he go to school?" "He goes to school in the morning and works in the afternoon. That's how we manage to pay the bills." Richard Thompson was silent for a moment, thinking. "I have a proposal. I want to offer you a job at my house. A steady job with a fair wage and all the labor rights. And I want Tyler to stop working at the fruit stand and focus on his studies." Deborah blinked, unable to process what she was hearing. "Sir, that's too generous. I can't accept." "Why not?" Because it seems like charity. And I've always worked hard so I wouldn't have to depend on anyone's charity." "It's not charity," Richard corrected. "It's recognition. Your son did something extraordinary. Let me repay you in some way. Besides, I need someone trustworthy working at home, especially now with Melissa and the baby staying there for a while." Deborah looked at Tyler, who was watching her with hope in his eyes. "And about Tyler's studies," Richard continued. "There's a very good private school near my house. I would like to pay for his studies there. He's clearly intelligent and deserves a good education." Tears began to stream down Deborah's face. For years she had struggled, worked to the point of exhaustion, all to give Tyler a better life. And now, because of her own son's kindness and courage, this opportunity had arisen. I accept," she finally said, "but on one condition." "What is it?" "Let me earn this job. I'll work hard. I'll prove I'm worthy of the trust you're placing in me." Richard smiled, recognizing the pride and dignity of that woman. "I have no doubt about that." They settled the details, and Richard got ready to leave. Before leaving, he turned to Tyler once more. "Thank you," he said simply. "From the bottom of my heart, thank you." Tyler smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "I just did what was right, sir." Back at his home, Richard found Emily Thompson still awake, sitting on the porch overlooking the garden. She was staring into nothingness, lost in thought. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "How can I sleep after everything I found out today?" she replied, her voice tired. "For 2 years, I thought I knew Michael. I thought we were building something real, something special, and it was all a lie." "Not everything was a lie," Richard said softly. "You are real. Your feelings were real. The love you felt was genuine. Just because he didn't deserve it doesn't mean you were wrong to feel it." Emily looked at her father with tearful eyes. "How do you do it? How do you keep trusting people after being betrayed?" Richard thought about the question, remembering his own wife, the trust they had in each other. "Because the alternative is to live in fear, suspicious of everyone around you. And that's no way to live. Your mother taught me that trusting is a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. Sometimes you get hurt, sometimes you're betrayed, but sometimes you find people like that boy today, people who restore your faith in humanity." Emily leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "Tyler was amazing, wasn't he?" "He was. And you know what impressed me the most? He didn't even know us. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose, but he came anyway because he believed it was the right thing to do. They were silent for a moment, absorbing the peace of the night. "Dad, what now?" Emily asked. "What do we do about Michael?" "Now we sleep. Tomorrow we start sorting things out legally and correctly. We'll protect Melissa and the baby. We'll make sure Michael answers for his crimes, and we'll move forward." "It seems simple when you put it like that." "It's never simple," Richard admitted. "But it's necessary." The next morning, the Thompson mansion was bustling. Richard's lawyers arrived early, bringing with them specialists in family law and financial fraud. Melissa spent hours reporting everything she knew about Michael's activities, handing over all the documents she had. Tyler and his mother Deborah also arrived early. Richard had arranged for Deborah to start working that very day, to get familiar with the household routine. Tyler, in turn, would be enrolled in the private school the following week. While the adults talked in the living room, Tyler found Emily in the garden. She was sitting near a fountain looking at the running water. "Hi," he said timidly. "Hi, Tyler," she replied with a weak smile. "Aren't you in school?" "Not today. My mother said I could miss school to take care of some matters with your father. And you? Don't you work?" Emily let out a humorless laugh. "I used to work at my father's company, but I think I'm going to take a few days off. I need to think about a lot of things." Tyler sat down beside her, his feet barely reaching the ground of the stone bench. "Miss Emily, can I ask you something?" "You can, and just call me Emily, okay?" "Are you very sad?" Emily thought about the question. "I am, but I'm also relieved, and ashamed, and angry. It's a lot of feelings at once." "Ashamed why?" "For being so blind, for not seeing the signs. My Aunt Margaret always said Michael was too good to be true, but I didn't want to listen. I thought she was being overprotective." "You're not blind," Tyler said with the conviction of someone absolutely certain of what they were saying. "You trust people. That's not a bad thing." He was the bad one, not you. Emily looked at that boy, so young but with so much wisdom in his words. "Thank you, Tyler. You don't know how much that means to me." "Yes, I do. My mother went through something similar. My father left us when I was very little." She was like that too, blaming herself. But with time she realized it wasn't her fault. It was just that he wasn't a good person. Emily felt a connection with that boy, a mutual understanding of pain and overcoming. "Your mother is a strong woman." "Yeah, and you are too. I noticed yesterday when you talked to Melissa, you could have been angry with her, but you felt sorry for her. That's being strong." Before Emily could answer, Margaret appeared on the porch. "Emily, the lawyers want to speak with you. And Tyler, your father is looking for you." The two got up and walked back inside the house. In the living room, the atmosphere was tense. The lawyers had serious expressions as they leafed through documents. "What is it?" Richard asked, sensing the gravity in the air. The lead lawyer, Dr. August, a man with graying hair and reading glasses, sighed heavily. "The situation is worse than we imagined. Michael didn't just defraud Melissa with these documents. He also used false information to obtain loans in her name. We're talking about debts reaching $800,000. Melissa, who was sitting with the baby in her lap, turned pale. $800,000? But that's impossible. I never applied for loans." "You didn't apply, but your signature is on the documents. Michael falsified information about your income, about properties you supposedly owned. The banks were deceived just as much as you were." "And now?" Richard asked. "What can be done?" "We can file a lawsuit alleging fraud, but it will take time. Meanwhile, the creditors will go after Melissa. She could have her accounts frozen, assets seized if she has any in her name." "I have nothing," Melissa whispered. "Just the house I live in, and even that is still being paid off." "The house can be seized," Dr. August confirmed. "Unless we can quickly prove the fraud and nullify these contracts." Richard stood up and began pacing the room, thinking, "How much time do we have before the creditors take action?" "Days, maybe a week at most." "That's not enough time," Margaret observed. It was then that Tyler, who had been listening quietly, had an idea. "What if we found Michael?" he suggested. "If he confessed everything, it would be easier to prove the fraud, wouldn't it?" "It would," Dr. August agreed. "But Michael has disappeared. No one knows where he is." "I know how to find him," Tyler said, making everyone look at him. "How?" Richard asked. "The man in the grey suit, Vincent Miller. If Michael owes him money, he must know where Michael is. Or at least, he must be looking for him too." "That's very dangerous," Deborah protested, finally understanding where the conversation was headed. "Vincent Miller is not someone to be trifled with." "I'm not suggesting we confront him," Richard explained. "But Tyler is right. If we can find out where Vincent is looking for Michael, maybe we can find him first." "And how do you suggest we do that?" Margaret asked. Richard thought for a moment. "Tyler, you said your mother worked at Vincent's office. Does she know his routine?" Deborah nodded hesitantly. "I do. I cleaned his office for 6 months. He had very set schedules. He always arrived at 8 in the morning, had lunch at the same restaurant, left at 6. And the employees? Would any of them be approachable?" "There's Sandra. She's been his secretary for years. We used to talk sometimes. She's a good person, just stuck in a bad job because she needs it." Richard looked at Dr. August. "If we can get information about where Vincent is looking for Michael, would that be useful?" "It would, but how do you plan to get that information without putting anyone at risk?" "Leave that to me," Richard said with determination. That afternoon, Richard and Deborah went to the commercial building where Vincent Miller's office was located. It was a modern building, all glass, situated in a busy commercial area. "Sandra usually takes her coffee break at 3 o'clock, Deborah informed him. "She goes to the coffee shop on the ground floor." Richard looked at his watch. 3:15. "Let's wait then." 10 minutes later, a middle-aged woman with dyed blonde hair and discreet clothing stepped out of the elevator and headed to the coffee shop. Deborah recognized her immediately. "That's her." Richard and Deborah approached. When Sandra saw them, her face showed surprise. "Deborah? It's been so long." "Hi, Sandra. How are you? Do you have a minute?" Sandra looked around, a little suspicious, but nodded. They sat at a discreet table in the corner of the coffee shop. "Sandra, this is Richard Thompson," Deborah introduced. "We need your help with something delicate." Sandra became visibly nervous. "Deborah, you know I can't talk about work. Vincent is very clear about that." "We know," Richard interjected, "and we don't want to put you at risk. But an innocent woman and a baby are in danger because of a man named Michael Reynolds. Do you know that name?" Sandra hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I do. Vincent is furious with him. Michael owes a lot of money and disappeared." "Is Vincent looking for him?" Richard asked. "He is. He has several people after him. Just yesterday I overheard a phone conversation. It seems they found out that Michael has a brother in Boston." Richard and Deborah exchanged looks. A brother. That was a lead. "Do you know the brother's name? Where he lives in Boston?" "I don't know the name, but I heard Vincent saying that he lives near Beacon Hill in a high-end condominium. That's all I know, I swear." "That helps a lot already," Richard said. "Sandra, thank you very much. And don't worry, no one will know you told us this." Sandra still looked worried, but she nodded. She stood up and went back to the elevator, leaving Richard and Deborah to process the information. "Boston," Richard murmured. Michael went into hiding with his brother. Back at the mansion, Richard gathered everyone in the living room and shared the information. Dr. August immediately started making calls, trying to find out more about this supposed brother of Michael's. "I found him," he said after half an hour of research. "Patrick Reynolds, Michael's younger brother, lives in Boston, in the Beacon Hill Gardens gated community. A businessman, apparently successful. No criminal records or known debts." "So Michael is there," Emily concluded. "Probably," Dr. August agreed. "What do we do now?" Margaret asked. Richard thought for a moment. "We go there, tomorrow morning. Me, Dr. August, and anyone else who wants to go. We'll confront Michael and make him confess everything." "I'm going," Emily declared. "Sweetheart, I don't think that's a good idea. Dad, I need to do this. I need to look him in the eye and hear the truth from his own mouth." Richard wanted to protest, but he recognized that determination. It was useless to argue. "All right, but we go safely. We don't know how Michael will react." "I want to go too," Melissa said quietly. "He ruined my life. He deserves to hear what I have to say." The next morning, 2 cars left the Thompson mansion heading for Boston. In the first, Richard drove with Emily beside him. In the back, Margaret and Dr. August. In the second car, Richard's driver took Melissa and 2 security guards. Tyler had begged to go along, but Deborah was firm. He had to stay, study, and get ready to start at his new school. Richard promised to tell him everything when they returned. The Beacon Hill Gardens community was exactly as they had imagined. An automatic gate, 24-hour security, spacious houses with well-kept gardens. The doorman was initially reluctant to let them in, but Dr. August explained they had urgent legal matters to discuss with Patrick Reynolds. They were directed to a house at the end of the street, a modern building with a glass and exposed concrete facade. Richard rang the doorbell and waited. The man who opened the door was about 35 years old, tall, with features similar to Michael's, but with a much more relaxed posture. "Yes?" he asked, looking at the group with confusion. "Patrick Reynolds," Richard asked. "Yes? And you are?" "My name is Richard Thompson. We're looking for your brother, Michael." The change in Patrick's face was instant. Confusion gave way to a tired, almost resigned expression. "Of course you are," he said with a sigh. "Come in." They followed Patrick into a spacious, well-decorated living room. He invited them to sit and got straight to the point. "Let me guess. Michael owes you money, or promised something he couldn't deliver, or maybe both." "Both," Richard confirmed, "and more, much more." Patrick rubbed his face with his hands. "I told him this would end badly. I warned him 1,000 times, but Michael never listens." "Where is he?" Emily asked, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. Patrick looked at her, really seeing her for the first time. Recognition shone in his eyes. "You must be the fiancée, the rich businessman's daughter." "Ex-fiancée," Emily corrected. "Where is he?" "In the guest room, hiding like a rat," Patrick said with disdain. "He showed up here the day before yesterday, desperate, saying he'd gotten into trouble. It's not the first time, probably won't be the last." "Can we speak with him?" Dr. August asked. Patrick hesitated. "Look, I don't get involved in my brother's problems, but I'm not going to make it easy for him to run from his responsibilities either. If you want to talk to him, you can talk. But do it civilly. I don't want any trouble in my house." "There will be no trouble," Richard assured him. "We just want answers." Patrick led them to the second floor. He knocked on a door at the end of the hall. "Michael, you have visitors." Silence. "Michael, I know you're in there. Open this door or I'll open it with my key." After a moment, the door opened slowly. Michael appeared, disheveled, with an unshaven beard, wearing wrinkled clothes. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept in days. When he saw who was outside, he tried to close the door, but Patrick held it. "No, Michael. You're going to face this." Michael looked from Richard to Emily, then to Melissa, who was a few steps behind. His expression went through several emotions: fear, anger, shame, despair. "What do you all want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The truth," Richard replied simply. "We want to hear everything, from your own mouth." Michael let out a humorless laugh. "The truth? You don't want the truth. You want to see me destroyed." "You're already destroyed, Michael," Emily said, her voice breaking. "You did this to yourself. Now at least have the courage to admit what you did." Michael looked at her, and for a moment, something like remorse crossed his face. "Emily," he began, but she interrupted him. "No. You don't have the right to say my name in that tone, not after everything you've done." "I didn't want it to be like this," Michael said, and tears were beginning to form in his eyes. "In the beginning, yes, it was only about the money, but later I genuinely grew attached to you." "Lies!" Emily spat the word. "You never felt anything for me. You just saw an opportunity." Michael shook his head, desperate to make her understand. "That's not true. Yes, I started because of the money, but things changed. You changed that. You made me want to be a better person." "But you didn't become a better person." Melissa spoke for the first time. her voice trembling but firm. "You kept lying, you kept deceiving. You deceived me, you deceived her, you deceived everyone." Michael looked at Melissa, and the guilt on his face was undeniable. "Melissa, You what? You're sorry. You didn't mean to hurt me," Melissa interrupted, her voice rising. "You made me sign documents that left me full of debt. You ruined my life, our son's life." "It was an accident," Michael protested. "I thought I was going to be able to pay everything back. I had a plan. If the marriage to Emily had worked out, I would have had enough money to pay your debts and mine. Everyone would have come out ahead." "Except Emily," Margaret observed coldly. "She would have been destroyed financially and emotionally." Michael had no answer for that. He simply hung his head, defeated. Dr. August stepped forward. "Michael Reynolds, you are being accused of fraud, falsification of documents, and attempted misappropriation of funds. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Michael lifted his head, tears flowing freely now. "I did it all. Everything you're accusing me of, I did. The fake signatures, the fraudulent loans, the plan to manipulate Emily after the marriage. Everything." The silence that followed was heavy. It was a full confession, without any excuses. "Why?" Emily asked, her own voice broken with emotion. "Why did you do it?" Michael looked at her, and there was a brutal honesty in his eyes. "Because I was desperate. For years I've been accumulating debts, trying to maintain an appearance of success that doesn't exist. I lost everything in bad investments, in gambling, in failed attempts to get rich quick. And when I met you, you were my salvation. Or at least that's what I thought." "You never loved me," Emily concluded, not as a question, but as a statement. Michael hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know what real love is, Emily. My whole life has been about lying, about pretending, about trying to be someone I'm not. How could I love someone when I don't even know who I am?" It was a devastating admission, but also strangely honest. "You will have to answer legally for all of this," Dr. August informed. "But if you cooperate, if you help to annul the fraudulent contracts and clear Melissa's name, there might be a reduction in your sentence." Michael looked at Melissa. "I will do it. I will sign whatever is necessary. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to minimize the damage." "And Vincent Miller?" Richard asked. "You owe him money. He is looking for you." Michael paled even more. $500,000. "And the interest is accruing. He will destroy me if I don't pay." "How much do you owe in total, considering all the creditors?" Michael did the math mentally. "With Vincent, with the banks, with other people, it's close to $1.5 million. Richard let out a low whistle. It was an absurd amount for someone with no fixed income. "And you really thought marrying my daughter would solve all this?" "It was my only hope," Michael admitted. "My last chance." Patrick, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Michael, when will this end? When will you stop trying to solve problems with more lies?" "I don't know, Patrick. I really don't know." Dr. August opened his briefcase and took out some documents. "I will need you to sign statements admitting to the fraud. You will also have to go to a notary public to acknowledge that Melissa's signatures on the loans were obtained fraudulently." Michael nodded, defeated. He spent the next hour signing documents, answering questions, providing details of every fraud he had committed. It was a painful but necessary process. When they finished, Richard stood up. "One last thing," he said. "Keep your distance from Emily, from Melissa, and from my entire family. If I find out you tried any kind of contact, I will not hesitate to take more severe measures." Michael nodded, with no strength to argue. Emily looked at him one last time. That man she had loved, trusted, planned a future with. Now he was there, a stranger destroyed by his own choices. "Goodbye, Michael," she said softly, and there was finally peace in her voice. They left Patrick's house and returned to the cars. Nobody said much during the trip back. Each one was lost in their own thoughts, processing everything that had happened. When they arrived back at the mansion, Tyler was waiting anxiously on the porch. "So, did you manage it?" "We did," Richard confirmed. "Michael confessed to everything. He signed the documents that will clear Melissa's name. Tyler gave a huge smile. So it's over? She's free? It will still take some time to process everything, Dr. August explained. But yes, it's basically over. Melissa got out of the car holding the baby, and for the first time in days there was a smile on her face. Thank you, she said to Richard. Thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me. I just did what was right. In the following weeks, things slowly returned to some kind of normality. Dr. August worked diligently to annul all the fraudulent contracts. Michael was prosecuted and received a 4-year sentence, but with the possibility of serving it in a semi-open regime due to his cooperation. Vincent Miller never did find Michael. When he learned that Michael no longer had any way to pay, he simply passed the debt to a collection agency and forgot the case. For someone like Vincent, $500,000 was a lot of money, but not enough to dedicate personal resources to collecting it. Melissa sold the house where she lived with Michael and used the money to pay off the last remaining smaller debts. Richard invited her to stay at the mansion for as long as she needed, until she got back on her feet. Tyler started at the private school and excelled immediately. His teachers were impressed with his dedication and natural intelligence. He made friends quickly but never forgot where he came from or the lessons his mother taught him. Deborah adapted perfectly to her work at the mansion. She and Mrs. Betty, the old housekeeper, developed a beautiful friendship, working together to keep the house running perfectly. Emily needed time to recover emotionally. She went to therapy, talked a lot with Aunt Margaret, and slowly began to rebuild her confidence. She went back to work at her father's company, but now with a new focus. She proposed creating a support program for victims of financial fraud, using her own experience to help others. Margaret, in turn, became a mother figure for Melissa. The two spent hours talking, sharing experiences, and supporting each other. Margaret had never had children, and in a way Melissa and little Nathan filled that void in her life. 3 months after the events of the cancelled engagement, Richard organized a dinner at his house. Everyone was there: Emily, Margaret, Melissa and the baby, Tyler and Deborah, Mrs. Betty. Even Mrs. Rose from the club was invited. During dinner, Richard stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank all of you," he began. "In these past few months, I've learned many things. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who is by your side when you need them most. I learned that courage comes in all sizes, sometimes in the body of a 12-year-old boy." He looked at Tyler, who blushed from the attention. "I learned that second chances exist and that it's not too late to make peace with the past," he continued, looking at Melissa. "And I learned that sometimes the greatest tragedies lead to the greatest blessings. So, I make this toast," Richard raised his glass, "to the family we choose, to the lessons we've learned, and to the future we will still build together." "Cheers," everyone replied in unison, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the room. Later that night, after everyone had left or retired to their rooms, Richard found himself again on the porch looking at the moonlit garden. Emily joined him, as had become their custom. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. If you could go back in time, would you change anything? Would you try to stop me from meeting Michael from the beginning?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "No," he said finally. "Because if I did that, we wouldn't have met Tyler and Deborah. Melissa would still be trapped in a lie, not knowing the truth about Michael. And you wouldn't have learned some of the most important lessons of your life." "They were painful lessons," Emily observed. "The best lessons usually are. But look at you now, stronger, wiser, more compassionate. More. You helped Melissa when you could have felt anger. You forgave when you could have held a grudge. That is growth, my daughter, and no amount of money or success can buy that kind of growth." Emily leaned against her father. "Thank you for always being here. I always will be." They stood there, father and daughter, looking at the stars and reflecting on the winding path that had led them to that moment of peace. The months turned into a year. Tyler continued to excel in school, winning awards in math and science Olympiads. Richard began to see him not just as the brave boy who saved his daughter, but as a bright young man with a promising future. Melissa got a job at an accounting firm. Her knowledge of numbers, acquired the hard way through her financial troubles with Michael, proved valuable. She began to rebuild her life, step by step, with the help and support of the Thompson family. Emily, in turn, found purpose in helping others. The program she created at her father's company grew, helping dozens of people who had been victims of financial scams. She became an active voice in the community, speaking about the signs of abusive relationships and fraud. It was during one of these talks that she met Robert. He was a psychologist who worked with trauma victims and had been invited to speak at the same event. The connection between them was instant, but Emily was cautious. She had learned not to rush, to really get to know a person before giving her heart away. Robert was patient. He understood Emily's fears and respected her boundaries. Slowly, over months, a friendship developed, a friendship based on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding of each other. Tyler was one of the first to notice the change in Emily. "You're different," he observed one day when she was picking him up from school. "Different how?" Emily asked, curious. "Lighter. Like a weight has been lifted from your shoulders." Emily smiled. That boy always had a way of seeing through people, of noticing things others missed. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. "Maybe I've finally learned to leave the past behind." "Is it because of Robert?" Tyler asked, straight to the point. Emily laughed. "You don't miss a thing, do you?" "My mom says I'm too observant for my own good," Tyler said with a smile. "But Robert seems nice. He looks at you the right way." "The right way?" "Yeah, like you're the most important person in the world, but not in a suffocating way. In a respectful way." Emily was touched by the observation. At just 13, Tyler already had more wisdom about relationships than many adults. "Thank you, Tyler. Your opinion means a lot to me." For Emily's birthday, Richard organized a party. Not something extravagant like the cancelled engagement, but something intimate and meaningful, just the people who truly mattered. It was at this party that Emily officially introduced Robert to the family. Richard watched him carefully, asking questions, weighing every answer. But unlike Michael, who had passed the superficial test but failed the essential one, Robert was genuine in every word, in every gesture. Margaret, with her sharp intuition, approved of Robert almost immediately. "Now this one is a good man," she whispered to Richard. "This one will take good care of her." And she was right. Robert didn't just take care of Emily. He respected her, supported her, and challenged her to grow. They built a healthy relationship based on open communication and mutual trust. 2 years after the cancelled engagement, on a simple Sunday afternoon, Robert asked Emily to marry him. It wasn't a big spectacle. There were no crowds or elaborate displays. It was just the two of them, walking in the park where they'd had their first date. "Emily," Robert said, stopping under a flowering tree, "I know you have reasons to be cautious. I know you've been hurt before. But I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me, that your heart is safe with me." He knelt, taking a simple box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Emily had tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of happiness. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times yes." The wedding was different from anything Emily had imagined years before. It wasn't at a luxurious club. It didn't have hundreds of guests or an elaborate ceremony. It was in the garden of the Thompson mansion, with only the people they loved and who loved them back. Tyler was one of the groomsmen, proud in the suit Richard had bought for him. Melissa and little Nathan were there, as were Deborah, Mrs. Betty, and Mrs. Rose. Margaret was the one who gave Emily away, since she had been more than an aunt during those difficult years. When the officiant asked if anyone had objections to the marriage, Tyler let out a little laugh, remembering how it all began. But this time, nobody objected. There were no lies to reveal, no hidden secrets, only genuine love and hope for the future. At the reception, Richard made another toast. 2 years ago, I was in a hall much like this one, celebrating what I thought was my daughter's happiness, but that was an illusion, built on lies and manipulation. Today, I see my daughter truly happy, and the difference is as clear as day. He looked at Robert. "Robert, you didn't just win my daughter's heart. You earned the respect of this entire family. Take good care of her, not because I'm asking, but because I know you'll want to anyway." "I will, sir," Robert promised. "Always." The party continued into the night, with music, dancing, and laughter. It was a celebration not just of a wedding, but of everything those people had overcome together. At a corner of the garden, Tyler was talking with some school friends who had been invited. Richard watched him from afar, proud of the young man he was becoming. "Hard to believe it all started with that shout, isn't it?" Margaret said, appearing beside her brother. "Yes," Richard agreed. "A desperate boy trying to do the right thing. And look where it led us." "You know what I find the most beautiful in all of this?" Margaret asked. "What?" "That Tyler gained nothing from it. He risked everything with no guarantee of a reward, not knowing if anyone would believe him. He did it because it was right, and in a way, that act of pure kindness saved not just Emily, but all of us." Richard nodded, feeling his chest tighten with emotion. "He taught me something important, Margaret. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and acting anyway. It's about seeing something wrong and not being able to stay silent no matter the cost." "And now," Margaret asked, "where do we go from here?" "To the future," Richard answered simply. "A future we built together, with honesty and love." Years passed. Tyler graduated high school with honors and won a full scholarship to study engineering at one of the best universities in the country. On graduation day, Richard was in the audience, applauding as loudly as any proud father. "Thank you," Tyler said later when they were alone, "for everything you did for me and my mother." "You don't have to thank me," Richard replied. "You saved my daughter. Nothing I do will ever be enough to repay that." "It wasn't just about saving her," Tyler said. "It was about doing what was right. My mother always said that when we see something wrong, we have a responsibility to act. I just did what she taught me." "Your mother is a wise woman." "Yes," Tyler agreed with a smile. "And you are a good man, Mr. Richard. Never doubt that." Melissa also rebuilt her life. She met someone new, a kind man who worked at her company. They started slowly, building trust, creating a solid foundation. When they finally married, it was a small ceremony, but full of meaning. Little Nathan grew up in an environment of love and support. He never knew much about Michael, only that his biological father had made mistakes and was paying for them. But he had positive father figures in his life: Richard, who treated him like a grandson, Robert, who always had time to play with him, and Melissa's new husband, who loved him as his own. Emily and Robert had 2 children, and Richard became the grandfather he had always dreamed of being. He reduced his workload, delegating more responsibilities so he could spend time with his grandchildren. On a sunny afternoon, 10 years after the cancelled engagement, the whole family gathered again in the mansion's garden. This time it was to celebrate Richard's 75th birthday. He looked around, seeing all those beloved faces, Emily and Robert with their children, Melissa, her husband, and Nathan, now a clever pre-teen. Tyler, already graduated and working as an engineer, with his first girlfriend by his side. Deborah, now partially retired but still living in the mansion's guest house. Margaret, aging gracefully and keeping everyone in line with her sharp humor. Grandpa, one of Richard's grandchildren called him. "Tell that story again." "Which story, little one?" Richard asked, although he knew exactly which one. "The one about Uncle Tyler yelling at the party. That's the best one." Richard laughed, looking at Tyler, who shook his head, still a bit embarrassed even after all these years. "Well, once upon a time," Richard began, and everyone settled in to listen. "A very brave boy saw something wrong happening. He didn't know the people involved had nothing to gain by intervening, but he couldn't stay quiet because he knew it was the right thing to do." "And did he yell really loud?" the grandson asked, fascinated. "Yes, he did. So loud that everyone stopped to listen. And you know what happened then?" "What?" "He saved not just one person but an entire family. He saved us from a big mistake, from a great pain. And by doing that he became part of this family, not by blood, but by choice, by love." The grandson looked at Tyler with admiration. "I want to be brave like Uncle Tyler when I grow up too." "Then remember," Richard said, pulling the grandson close. "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing, even when you are scared. It's about seeing something wrong and not being able to stay quiet. It's about risking everything because you believe in something bigger than yourself. And what if nobody believes me? The boy asked. Some people will believe you, and those are the people who matter. The rest in time will see the truth. The truth always finds a way. Later, when the party was winding down and the children had been put to bed, the adults sat on the porch. The conversation flowed easily, as it does among people who have been through a lot together. You know, Emily said suddenly, I thank God every day that engagement was called off. Really? Robert asked, surprised. Yes, because if I had married Michael, not only would my life have been destroyed, I never would have met you. I never would have had the children. I never would have learned the lessons I learned, never would have grown the way I did. Sometimes, Margaret observed, the greatest blessings come disguised as tragedies. You have to go through the darkness to truly appreciate the light. Profound truth, Aunt, Emily agreed. Tyler, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. You know what I learned from all this? He asked. What? Several asked at once. That no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. That day when I yelled at that party, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if anyone would hear me, if they would believe me. I just knew I had to try. He paused, choosing his words. And that single act, that moment of courage, changed not only your lives, but mine too. It changed my mother's life. It created this family we have here today, all because I couldn't stay quiet when I saw something wrong. And we are eternally grateful for that, Richard said, raising his glass. Another toast, then, to the courage of a boy who couldn't stay quiet, to the family that formed from that shout, and to the future we will still build together. Cheers, everyone replied, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed into the night. When everyone had finally retired and the house was quiet, Richard stayed on the porch a little longer. He thought of his wife, who had passed away years ago, and wished she could see all that had blossomed from that crisis. You would be proud, he whispered to the stars. Our daughter found true love. Our family has grown in ways we never imagined, and all because a boy had the courage to shout when he saw something wrong. A gentle breeze blew, making the leaves on the trees whisper. Richard chose to believe it was his wife somehow agreeing with him. I am proud too, he continued. Proud of Emily for her strength, of Melissa for her resilience, of Tyler for his courage, of all of us for turning a tragedy into something beautiful. He stayed there a few more minutes, absorbing the peace of the night, feeling grateful for every moment, every person, every lesson learned. Then, with a contented sigh, he stood up and went into the house. Tomorrow would be another day. There would be new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to do the right thing. But for now, he had peace. He had family. He had love. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. A boy's shout at an engagement party had changed everything. It had saved a woman from a fraudulent marriage. It had exposed a corrupt man. It had brought together people who would never have met otherwise. It had created a family not of blood, but of choice and love. And this family, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by compassion and courage, was stronger than any blood tie could ever be. It was living proof that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible, is always worth it. Because in the end, it's not the lies that define us. It's the truths we choose to stand up for. It's not the mistakes we make, but how we recover from them. And it's not the families we are born into, but the ones we choose to create with our hearts. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of courage and redemption? Have you ever experienced something similar, or know someone who lived through a situation like this? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories that will warm your heart.